For those of you who have joined already, welcome. We'll just give a minute or two to let the other participants join this webinar. Hello again, and welcome to this webinar on the topic of trust, transparency, and personalization, building deeper relationships with your readers. We still have some participants joining, but I will start slowly but surely by welcoming everyone. We had around 100 registered for this event, so thank you very much for your interest, which also confirms what we think is that this is a very important, crucial topic for the news media industry today, as it has been for some years. I'll start just by giving you some information about what actually is this CPN acronym that you've been seeing and that you can read on your screen. We are the organizers of this webinar, and the webinar is about personalization as a broader topic, but CPN stands for the Content Personalization Network, which is a project funded by the European Commission and its research and innovation program. It's a project that started at the end of 2017 and finished a couple of days ago. It lasted 32 months exactly. It was a consortium of 9 members that included media. And you see on my screen right now, media, tech companies and agencies, academia, and a media association, which I work for, called ONE-IFRA. So my name is Steven Frossard. I'm the director of the Global Alliance for Media Innovation at ONE-IFRA, and we aim to put forward project research and innovation projects like these. Over the 32 months that we've been working all together, our goal was to create a tool, which is in fact a toolkit. It's a hybrid recommender system using a mix of different techniques that are already out there. But we have the aim to mix these different techniques and make a tool which is state of the art and which is now functioning and has been tested with some of our partner media companies. We use content-based recommendations, which we mix with collaborative filtering techniques, and we throw in there some most popular recommendations and of course some random recommendations. Now, the idea today was to create, as I said, a webinar around the broader topic of personalization, around the topic of trust and transparency within that field. And the idea is for 90 minutes, we've invited some excellent speakers, very knowledgeable about this topics. We've divided the webinar into 3 separate sections, which broadly could be considered as the what, the why, and the challenges. So what types of personalization are we talking about? Why personalization? Why have you thought of personalization, and what did you get from it? And of course, the challenges you ran into. So each part is going to be moderated by one member of the CPN team. And during these conversations, which will each last around 15 minutes, you'll hear more about what has been happening in our panelists' companies. We'll also have 2 startup demos and the opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of this event by chat. So please type your questions in and our moderators will read them out. This will happen at the end. Just some information here, the webinar is recorded and we will of course do a follow-up email to this event where you will receive a link to download the recording, the slides that were presented, the contacts of the people that wish to be contacted, and some links to organize some one-to-one meetings with our presenters if that is of interest to you. So now I'd just like to present our speakers for today, starting with Swantje Fischenbeck in Germany. She's the Innovation Management at Der Spiegel. And Der Spiegel are at the beginning of reflection. They're exploring the idea of personalizing their content. Swantje herself has been working in innovation management for some years already. She joined Spiegel at the beginning of last year. And as I say, they're looking into this. We met them a couple of months ago and had the first discussions about what to do and how to do it. So she will have the point of view of a company that is looking into it, and she'll explain where they're at in the stages. My next speaker is Ine van Zeeland. She's based in Brussels with the Vrije University, which is actually one of our partners in CPN, and her expertise is privacy, data protection, accessibility of digital technologies. The idea with having Ine here is to give us the point of view of personalization, yes, but how does this impact on privacy? So welcome to both of you. On the male side, we have Jarno Koponen from Finland, and we're very happy to have him. He's his profile says he's interested in creating meaningful products with great people by combining UX and AI. I look forward to hearing in the conversations what you've been doing in Finland. He works for the public broadcaster in Finland. Last but not least, Gordon from Canada, Gordon Edall from Canada, the Globe and Mail in Canada. They've been working on personalization for 7 years already. His job at the Globe and Mail is heads of labs. They've been trying to encourage Globe and Mail staff to bring forward innovative ideas and giving them opportunity to develop them for a couple of months in the company and taking an idea to actually having a solid project and product at the end of it. So these are the 4 panelists we will have during the 3 different sections today. And I'll also present now 2 speakers who are each represent their startup, ID Ward and Loomi. It's important to note that at the beginning of last year, we organized a hackathon, a CPN hackathon, where we invited startups to come and work with us in order to prove that the CPN tool and our platform is open to external SMEs and startups like these. We've been working closely with these 2 particularly startups for the last year, and they will be demoing their tool in between our different panels today. So welcome Mattia and Al. That's all from me for now. You might hear me intervene sometimes just for the organization, but thank you very much. I'll now unshare my screen. No, I don't think I can do that, but the technical person responsible here will unshare me. And the first moderator is Luca from Digital Catapult in the UK, and he will moderate the first panel with our 4 panelists. Thank you very much and enjoy the webinar.
So thank you, Steven. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. And my name is Luca. I'm moderator for the first panel, and I'll briefly give you a heads up of what the Digital Catapult is. We are the UK's leading advanced digital technology innovation center, and we do accelerate the adoption of new and emerging technologies to drive regional, national, and international, when we can, growth for UK businesses across the economy. We do so across a range of technologies that are converging to form in an emerging advanced digital technology stack. So we go from artificial intelligence and machine learning to what we call future networks, so 5G, Internet of Things, and other next generation network technologies, immersive and distributed systems. So we include the distributed ledger technologies and blockchain, which is the reason why I'm here in the CPN project, because I worked on a blockchain related part. So I'd like to start talking in general about what personalization was and what it meant for us during the CPN project. And for us, there were two main sides of it. And from our perspective, one was to allow media organizations to serve more personalized content to their users while being respectful of their privacy and transparent while doing so. And the second part was to allow media organizations to, and potentially startups and SMEs and other companies, to enhance the product that we've built with add-ons, plugins, and new technology breaks. So basically to personalize it. And we've kept these two pillars from the beginning of the project. And I'm out of all the 32 months that Steven was saying before, I think that these were two constants that stayed in our way of working. So my first question would be for Swantje. I understand that you are just starting, you're at an early stage. Do you think that this is the right moment to think about personalization? How are you approaching this, and what do you think in general?
Thank you so much. First of all, hi to all of you out there. For your first question, I definitely think it's the right time and moment to start at least thinking about personalization. We started, I think, let me think, 5 months ago, and we had to stop a little bit because of the actual situation. But we are right now exploring the context of personalization for our company in a small research initiative. We have like product, editorial, and innovation experts, and we explore the context, which is especially for us as a company, in 3 dimensions, to just understand what personalization can mean for us specifically, and to maybe give you an image of those dimensions. We first started to check out the internal context of requirements. So we started thinking about what the users need we have to address with our products, and we also, of course, on the other hand, thought about how to make sure to respect, but also maybe stretch a little, our standards and mission as a news publisher. And last but not least, which is of course an important topic and gets more important every day, is how can personalization actually generate direct or indirect business value for us, because it's not a thing we do just to do some pretty stuff or something. So the second part, or the second dimension, is that we check out the world outside of the Spiegel, of course. So we're looking around which technological possibilities are actually out there we can make use of, or we are in deep research of which standards and habits the international entertainment market is setting, since we all compete. Doesn't depend on if it's entertainment or news or something else. We all compete for the attention and time of our users, of course. And last but not least, in the outside world, we have to, of course, consider regulations. We have to deep into, because it's not that easy in Germany. I think in other countries as well, but it's not the easiest point, I have to say. And then, of course, concerning personalization itself, there is a bouquet of different directions and possibilities we have to explore, and that's actually the point where we are right now. So, and that's also where we started discussions with the CPN network. And so we're asking ourselves, does active or passive and data-based personalization work for us better or for our users better? So is it active or passive personalization? And also the question, which variables should be kept in mind. So is it like the mood-based personalization, or time-based, or content-based, or context-based? So there are so many variables you can use for that. And also, of course, and that's the main part we're into right now, is which channels, which elements of the channels, or which formats can or should we personalize. That's basically the dimensions, or the 3 dimensions we're diving into right now.
It's very, very interesting. I have one little last question. Is there any piece of advice that you would like to give to anyone who's facing this personalization? I wouldn't say problem. I would say this personalization opportunity at the moment. Is there anything that you would like to suggest?
I think we actually talked about that on Monday. I think the best advice I can give is to really check out your context and not the context of others. So we started, of course, looking into what the New York Times is doing, or what other big players in the market are doing. But personalization itself doesn't work if you don't match it to the context and to your company and to your users. So that's definitely the point where everybody should start, I think.
Okay, thank you. So this makes me move to the next question, which is for Gordon. What about you? Did you have the chance to consider the personalization question at an early stage? Have you got anything in place at the moment that gives users a personalized feed? How are you approaching this?
Yeah, so we've been working on personalization for a very long time. When we were actually hiring the guy who went on to become our first chief data scientist, during his interview, he said one of the things that he really wanted to build for us was a recommendation engine, a personalization system, based on his background in kind of high-tech financial services and telecom, where he'd been doing the same thing for recommending applications or products. But news is a very different thing, just kind of the temporal nature of it, the amount of structure, the amount of subtlety within that structure in terms of being able to make a good recommendation. So we started looking at it as sort of part of the mobile product offerings, where we were trying to differentiate mobile products, where we had a lot better persistence for identification and a lot richer kind of clickstream history for any user, whether anonymous or registered or a subscriber. On mobile, we had a pretty good idea of who had read what when. And initially, we had a lot of success working with the same sorts of things that you guys are working on now, a lot of different collaborative filtering approaches. And we actually ended up building out a pretty rich recommendation architecture that has now a large number of different recommendation modules that are capable of making recommendations under different conditions. And then we actually sit a learning layer on top of that, so that we try to figure out, for any place we'd make a recommendation, what recommendation is likely to work best in that context. And we found that to be very effective. There simply are a lot of different ways to recommend something. And some of the cases are really clear and really easy to win. We've had some pretty good success with things like personalized features we call in case you missed it. So in case you missed it is a great kind of classic test case, right? So you saw someone Thursday, you published something great on Saturday, it's now the following Tuesday. How do you know to bring that thing back when you know that they would love it? If solving for that recommendation case is a nice clean one. There's actually like a incredibly large number of other problems that are much more difficult to solve. So you know, one of the ones that tends to be very vexing are variations of cold start. So what do? How do you make a recommendation when you don't know anything about the person, when you don't know anything about a new subject that's just come into existence, and whether or not a person would or would not be interested in that topic? We actually find those problems really interesting from like an engineering perspective, just because, you know, at the end of the day, this stuff has to work in all of the cases. And as you work through all of those things, there's a lot of complexity to get lost in. The good thing, though, is that as you layer personalization technologies in, you should be layering in kind of test and learn systems and learning how to tell whether or not your recommendation engines are working. So it's sort of not enough to just do personalization. You have to also do testing, and you have to figure out how to test one way of making a recommendation versus another way of making a recommendation. And obviously, like you know, as was just discussed, GDPR is a global regulatory framework that certainly makes that more complex. We certainly spend more time layering in additional control structures in order to make sure that we still do all this by the book. But that doesn't change the fact that what you're trying to do requires you to think through a few different problems: cold start, testing, learning how to get better over time. And for anyone, I would say, and then if you go back in the history of the New York Times, you'll find out that it took them a really long time to get better than most emailed. That turned out to be a very high bar to clear. If you're going to take a widget and personalize a widget, if you can beat most popular, that's great. If you can beat most emailed, even better. But it is actually quite hard to make salient recommendations, and the only way to know if you're making salient recommendations is to figure out how to test those recommendations.
So I guess that then your piece of advice, I'm asking you the same question that I asked Swantje. What is the piece of advice that you would like to give to anyone who's approaching the problem right now?
The biggest thing actually is testing. If you don't have a good testing framework in place, if you haven't thought about how to figure out if you're seeing any lift, you're kind of going to waste your time. The data scientists tend to be pretty good at looking at kind of model performance, but maybe less good at looking at sort of the opportunity cost of what else the newsroom might have done, and making sure that they account for additional strategies and to make sure that it's true lift as opposed to model A did better than model B through my limited data science lens. That tends to be the sort of thing that you need to take into account, because it's pretty easy to lose a newsroom with stuff like this. That's one of the things that we've always run into. And I think particularly at scale, with high degrees of personalization, you run a greater and greater risk of losing the newsroom. And that's certainly, you know, we are 175 years old, and we've been the leading news organization in Canada for a long time. It's not a position we wish to put in jeopardy. How do we do that? The personalization has to be the kind of personalization that helps us be who we are as a brand. As you go to higher degrees of personalization, that becomes harder and harder for editors to trust. So learn to talk to the newsroom, through data, through testing, and through evidence. That's the biggest thing that I would recommend. If you can't do that, you're going to have a tough time having the kind of impact that personalization technologies can have, because you're just say no.
Makes absolute sense. So we were talking about, thank you, Gordon, thank you very much. We were talking about GDPR, obviously, and the issues that thinking about GDPR brings, and it's global, so we can't escape it, and it's obviously to protect the users. So I guess that transparency and privacy play a big role. And in it, what do you think? What role does privacy play in this case? And is it something that we need to consider while giving the users the content that they desire, that they want?
Well, just to correct something first, the GDPR isn't, of course, a global piece of legislation. It's only for the European Union, but it has had effects the world over. As for, well, I think I need to disambiguate something here. What we've just heard are different types of personalization that are possible, and some of them do not require the use of personal data. And so the disambiguation that I would really like to make is that there is a difference between the protection of personal data that is regulated by the GDPR and the protection of privacy, which is in a way a much wider subject and includes, for example, also people's decisional privacy. So nobody, so to speak, messing with how you make your decisions or how you spend your time or how to attract your attention. So those are two different things. And the GDPR regulates how you use personal data. So if you use personalization techniques that require that you collect personal data on people, then the GDPR applies. But you might also use other types of personalization that do not require that you actually use personal data, but may still affect people's private sphere, so to speak. And then you're talking about privacy issues. In both cases, I think a requirement would be that you explain why you're doing what you're doing. So what's it to the user? I think Swantje already mentioned that it's very important, and Gordon just did so as well, to check back with what your user needs or what your user wants and whether it fits what they expect from you. So any type of personalization would require that you not only check back with them, but also explain to them, give a meaningful explanation that they would understand on the personalization, the what of it and the why of it as well.
And what do you think? Is there any piece of advice that you would like to give for any media organization that's?
Well, I concur with Gordon. Yeah, I concur with Gordon and Swantje that it's important to regularly verify with your users whether this is still what they want and this is what they need and whether they understand what you're doing.
Okay, thank you very much. So this brings me to Jarno. I see that you're head of personalization and artificial intelligence. Can you explain exactly why we need the AI in some personalization, in some ways of personalizing news? And wouldn't maybe a simpler preference selection by the user be enough to give something that's good, that's okay for them?
Okay, first of all, Luca, great to hear your voice and everyone else who has been speaking before me, and also everyone participating in this panel. So my name is Jarno Koponen. Like you said, I'm the head of AI and personalization at Vrije Newslab. We are a Finnish public broadcasting company. In my work, I focus on two main things. First, that how can we use these new technologies to really make meaningful experiences and tools for both for journalists and for citizens. So that's one thing, and in there AI can help. But before going there, we also need to make sure that we have the right culture to make it happen. So that's the second thing that I focus on. How can we create working methods and tools and processes that we can actually harness the power of these new technologies and new tools that we have? And I would even take a step back before going to the details of applying AI. So I think there are four main focus areas here for us when we think that how can we use these new technologies. First, content understanding, data, metadata about the content that we actually create as a news media. And then there is content creation. How can we augment the journalists to create better content or to be more creative? Or how can we automate some of this content creation by creating automated content creation systems, for example, that be it like they create text or illustrations or visualizations. Then there is the third thing, which is content distribution. And in here, the personalization and recommendation engines, they are just one part of this whole personalization phenomena or kind of experience that you can create. So first, content understanding, content creation, content distribution, and in order to actually understand how are you doing, you need to have the analytics. And in there again, these different methods, AI solutions, machine learning can help in understanding the performance. So how can you, how are you actually performing in the real world with real people, and then the experience itself. What works, what doesn't work, what kind of things actually resonate with people in the real world. So those 4 main focus areas we have, and in those 4 main focus areas, there's a lot of help with these new technologies that are used today.
Thank you. To ask you the same question that I asked the others, is there any piece of advice that you would like to give to any media organization who's facing this question at the moment?
Yeah, we have already heard some great advice there. I think the first is, what's your business? Why do you exist? And from there you go, what's your use case and business case that you can actually apply these new tools and technologies? And in there, then third is that, okay, when you do all these things, do you really understand the impact? And every time that you actually create something that combines the technological to social and cultural and political, you need to follow up. You need to see how it affects into the real world. So that's maybe the thing that I would like to emphasize here.
Thank you very much. And you were saying something at the beginning. Thank you, Jarno. You were saying something at the beginning that was related to having good keywords, and I think that this brings me to one of our startups, which is Loomi. Do you need good keywords to make personalization work, and how can we get there? So I'll give the word to Al, and thank you for all the panelists that talked so far.
Thank you very much, Luca. I'm hoping that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Excellent, cool. So thank you very much, Luca, for that intro. I'm Al Ramich. I'm the founder and CEO of Loomi.AI. The question that you ask is, let me just expand this. So the question you ask is ultimately how much metadata do you need to have to be able to personalize correctly and accurately, and obviously from all the conversation we have heard how important it is to actually have accuracy as part of personalization. Otherwise you lose the audience and the newsroom very quickly. So that's what we have been working with Loomi for the last few years. We're a London-based deep tech startup using artificial intelligence to create a platform that enables people to create personalized AI assistants. One of the core functionality of our technology is ultimately focusing on building an extensive meta-knowledge database, which we gather from hundreds of newspapers and public information and so on. So the question of how to improve metadata for better personalization is something that we have come across extensively and are focusing significantly. And I'll spend a couple of minutes just to show the theory of what we are doing, and then I'm actually going to switch and do a couple of minute demo to actually show you the product. So why is metadata important when you're considering personalization? As part of that question, really, we need to start thinking about the way to personalize information. Ultimately comes down to doing that at large scale. So if you're doing personalization at large scale and you need to do it against thousands of users and thousands of pieces of content, you need to automate the whole process. And once you're automating the process, ultimately you need a reference database of knowledge about the content that you're writing about. So there are some examples here why metadata is important as part of the automation of personalization. And these are some examples where In the if you're doing contextual personalization, it comes down to keywords, and keywords can come in many shapes or form. They can mean the same thing. They can be written in different ways. You know, Steve Jobs, for example, can be a person or can be a book. So contextually, from automation perspective, you need to understand: is in the context of this article, is it Steve Jobs as a person, or Steve Jobs as in a book? So when we look at personalization, we are really looking at 6 different levels of contextual personalization. Obviously, there are other types of personalizations that guys have mentioned so far. So we see it as sort of level 0 is ultimately you're creating content and you're pushing that content to everyone. Then you're doing some manual tagging of the content and trying to match that against the user. Next level would be using some sort of AI and NLP to automate the way you extract entities and tag them. And then level 3, 4, and 5 is ultimately where you need a reference database that you can look up and understand context behind each entity. So how it all works, so I'll just walk you through a practical example what we mean by 5 levels of personalization. So level 0, ultimately this is a standard piece of news that has been created. So first thing that we would do is use automation and NLP to identify the top entities in the context of this article. Next thing is we understand that against looking up against the backend database, what those entities are, and what even if there are entities with the same names, by recognizing the context in which they've been written, we can understand which is the correct one, and then we're pulling all this additional meta information that comes from lots of different public information to ultimately give you that additional information and context when you start to personalize. So the next thing that we do is organize those entities and understand what is the correlations between them in the context of this article and outside. So for example, has there been lots of articles about Donald Trump and coronavirus written by lots of different newspapers? And then ultimately what we do is create a knowledge graph that corresponds to this piece of news. And then on the other side, on the right-hand side, we can do the same on the user side. So on the user side, we can pull in information about the user from lots of different places, and you end up with 2 knowledge graphs that corresponds to either user interest or this article based on the meta information that we have built. And then what we do is then combine those 2 knowledge graphs ultimately into a much larger knowledge graph, which then we have a functionality, a layer of functionality that will extract insights and ultimately personalize delivery of news in a much more accurate way. So what we provide is 3 pillars. So we provide NLP technology that lets you look up entities accurately, a set of ontologies, which is meta information about things, and then a layer of personalization APIs that extract and mine that information. Let me just switch super quickly to a demo. So this is an example application that we have, which is a knowledge graph, which has millions of entities and information about those entities. An example you can see in here. So against Boris Johnson, we have all this information that we have compiled from lots of different places. And then ultimately on the right-hand side, we are also analyzing thousands of news articles to understand what is Boris Johnson as an entity written about contextually against other things, and to switch over into the more practical thing. So if I take this news article, which is something that's been published today, what that enables us to do is put that as a URL in here, and then we run it against our platform, which is automatically going to tag the entities, contextually map them against the right things, and so on. And then and you can see an example, for example, Boris Johnson or Mr. Johnson ultimately maps to the same thing. And then what we do is in the bottom you can see is the knowledge graph, which ultimately we will use to match this piece of content against user interest much more accurately versus if you don't have access to this meta knowledge. And last thing I'm just going to share is if you require more information on this, you can reach me on this email address. And also there is a publicly accessible demo, which is coronavirus.Loomi.AI, which you can visit now and have a play with our functionality and see how it works. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Al. I'll take over from here. So let me start by introducing myself quickly. So I'm a project leader innovation at VRT, which is a Flemish public broadcaster. And within VRT, I'm part of the innovation team, and I'm focused on projects regarding news. And I'm also the project lead of the CPN consortium. So that's why I'm here. Well, after hearing in the previous panel discussion all about what personalization means to the panel speakers, we're going to dive a bit deeper into the question, why do we want personalization? So we'll do that during this panel discussion, which I'll be moderating. But first, I'll start by sharing the reasons why CPN was set up. We can start from there. So we are aware that nowadays many news consumers are overwhelmed by the explosion of content which they have access to, which is clearly motivating the need for assistance in finding the right content at the right time. So that's what we're looking to. But on the other hand, you also have the media companies, including the news publishers, struggling to find the right to get the right content in an effective way to the right consumers. So the problem here is that most media companies don't really have the resources nor the scale to build and integrate an effective content personalization algorithm. And that's also why we started CPN. So the objective of CPN was actually to provide a platform delivering a set of services, allowing both large and small media companies to target the delivery of their news content to in the right format, at the right time, and better contextualized to their consumers. So, well, as we see, there are clearly two sides to the story, the user's needs, and you also have the media company's needs. So let's start with the first one. A question for Swantje. You already mentioned in the previous panel discussion that you did some research on the user needs. So why do you think users would want to use personalization?
First of all, what we experienced is never ask the user directly. So and our experience is that if you ask the user where he is interested into personalization or where he wants like a personalized newsfeed or something like that, in Germany, people are really scared and distant to personalization of news. So they're totally into it when it comes to Netflix, Spotify, or something like that. But on the news side, they are really critical and skeptical if that's something that they really want. So what we started, or what we are looking into right now, is more the question, what really helps them? So in which context do they really need personalization? Is it like the question, when do our users normally do what? In the morning, they probably read more the politics stuff and the hard facts. In the evening, they look more into the lifestyle topics. So we start like from the top and try to understand our users' behaviors and in which context and which situations they're in and in which way they start using our content. And so that's the point where we now want to start, and then just dig deeper and ask more specific questions in which context personalization would really help. So that's our approach right now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's interesting, and it leans towards the needs that we discovered here in CPN as well. I was thinking, Ina, if there are any specific points that you can add regarding the balance between the user needs, but also their data security.
That's a good question. as I've mentioned before, running the danger that I will be repeating myself, the best way is to ask them. I understand that people may be reluctant to have personalization in news. I myself am that as well. And actually, I'm also not very impressed by recommendation systems like the one that Netflix uses. I think it's hilarious, but it's completely incorrect. And so I would rather not have my news agency use something like that. And I would appreciate, actually, if I were asked about that before. I think that's a valuable approach to the general population, not just to privacy sensitive people like me.
Yeah, that's true. That's completely correct. Okay, then I would like to go to the media company needs. So maybe Gordon, why would you as a media company choose for personalization? Silence. Are you still there, Gordon? Okay, let's then ask the same question to Jarno, if you are okay with that.
Just a second. I'm very okay with that. So can you repeat the question, please, just to make sure that
my question
goes
is,
well.
what is Vrije looking into at the moment? Why would you choose personalization as a media company?
Well, I think this was mentioned already before, but everyone is competing on your attention and time. That's one thing. But maybe again, like put a human in the center of things in here, the citizen, the user. So our approach has been that, hey, we let the person to choose. So we are not like Facebook or Google that have this kind of a one feed to rule them all, or one search page to rule them all kind of a tactic. But for example, in our news services, be it the app, our personalized news app, or be it the website, a person can choose. So they have the kind of total vanilla, no anything personalized in the experience, or then they can have different levels of personalization in our services. So it's very important that if you personalize things, you make it transparent. You make it something that the person, the user, feels that he's in control. So that's our approach, and I think that actually we've studied this. We use both qualitative and quantitative methods to kind of truly understand, does this work? And based on our data, and also a nationwide study that we did in Finland, the people were saying that they like to have news service to personalize the experience if the news service is actually able to provide the important timely things for them, be it like in a particular topic that they are already interested in, but also if something really bad or extraordinary happens, that we can then put in front of the people as soon as possible. So yeah, I think personalization works, and especially young people are very interested in having a personalized news experience, even on their lock screen. And this is also something that we found through our qualitative and quantitative data. So first we had this study, young people, meaning like people from under 45 years, are interested in having personalized news alerts on their lock screen. And lock screen, I mean when you just take your mobile phone in your hand and you don't open any apps, you have the lock screen. And a big percentage of people wanted to have personalized news alerts on their lock screen. So I think personalization is important. It's a tool, one of the tools that a news media and journalists can use in order to provide factual important information in a way that makes people really to kind of to connect with these important things that are happening in the world. So I hope this answers your question.
It certainly does. Thank you. Let me try to get back to Gordon for a second, just checking if you're still there.
No,
great.
I can talk now. Yeah, when it comes to kind of why we use personalization, We invest a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort as a newsroom trying to find and tell great stories. And ideally, we're really trying to find the audiences who care most about those stories. And that trying to make that connection and trying to make sure that people can see the value of the work we do, find the things that are most of interest to them, we think is a pretty important part of the mandate, pretty important part of the mission. It doesn't help for us to write or tell or spend the time on a story that's going to matter to someone if someone can't find it. And that is a real problem, obviously, with the kind of degree and amount of just information that anyone has to process in any given day, the amount of time you have to scan a news site, the amount of time you have to switch from one news site to another. Trying to find relevant content and trying on the other side to not waste someone's time by showing them irrelevant content. We think that that's actually an important part of the set of considerations. You know, if we weren't making that effort and if we weren't trying to do that as people, everyone would just publish a big long list of reverse chronological stories. That is almost certain to be the worst strategy anyone could employ. So you're going to do something different than that. We spend a lot of time trying to set the news agenda in Canada. We spend a lot of time trying to be an authoritative voice that provides people with some perspective on the world around them. But that, for any set of editors, for any set of actions, is only ever really applicable in a moment. There are going to be things that we have done that you might miss, that you might overlook, or that we might not showcase to the world, but that are nonetheless super salient to you. So like a classic example of that is you happen to have stock in a relatively small company that isn't the kind of story that would ever be on the quote unquote front page. If through, like we run a set of financial tools and stuff, if we know that a stock that you hold, a stock quote that you look at often is being affected by news in a material way that might be financially important to you, it's kind of important that we try to tell you that. That's going to be information that's maybe hard for you to find otherwise until you look at your balance statement the next day. So there's a lot of things that we think are pretty valid cases. And if we restrict that personalization even to just the context of those financial tools, that's fine. We're not trying to hide what we're doing. We always want things to be contextually relevant and apparent. But the mix of personalization across all of the experiences, how much personalization needs to be layered in to augment that wider editorial mandate that we're trying to establish and drive, is one of those things that we talk about all the time. I'll say on balance, what we have found is in order for us to be who we want to be, personalization tends to be a very small percentage of the overall experience that we present to any user. We usually try to bake it into widgets that are pretty clearly personalized, and where the nature of that widget is clear. So I mentioned previously that in case you missed it, we do some similar things around some topics where it's clear that we're bringing back a topic that you've looked at before, but those tend to be pretty discrete. And in general, we find more success in terms of driving the performance of the business with broader approaches to optimization that look at very large sets of users as opposed to personalization, to get away from some of the creepiness and to be able to continue to have kind of like a more coherent kind of editorial front. So that mix between kind of human curation, automated curation, and one-to-one personalization that's kind of where we spend a lot of our time now. So at this stage of maturity, that's what we talk about more than kind of trying to push more and more aggressively for personalization. It's kind of personalization as a secondary or tertiary strategy, an important one though, because we do find we can make very meaningful connections with users who are very motivated to engage with some of our highest value content that might otherwise be hard to find. And that's what we really see that mission, that mandate for, is to do that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Gordon. Okay, then I'm going back to Swantje. So we've discussed why you want personalization, but what are you planning to achieve with personalization? What are your plans in the future?
Just maybe a quick addition to what Gordon said, because just came a little clearer also to my mind. It's that personalization for us is, as a news publisher, is the opportunity to change our mindset from being just a sender, so we send stuff out to the world, to become more interactive with our users and to really engage with our users, to really improve also our user experience and the experience our users have with us. So I think an important goal for us concerning also the importance of subscriptions these days is that we give our users an like orientation in their personal context and not in the context of the whole world, and guide them through their everyday life with the information they need. And I think personalization is one aspect which can help with that. Not the only one, I think, and probably not in every section of our products, but definitely in a huge way.
Yeah, okay.
If that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Okay, and then I'm going to Jarno. Can you tell us so far, what have you already achieved in your organization, or what are your future plans?
Let's see. Hopefully the system works. You can see me now. You can hear me now. Okay, I'm here.
Yeah. You're back.
Okay, great to see you again. Okay, great stuff from everyone so far. I think what I'd like to kind of think about here is that, you know, like I said, personalization is just one part of what we are trying to achieve with AI, with these new technologies. And also we try to kind of build different things to test what the future might bring. And I give you a very, very concrete example here. We created, and I dare to say, the very first news assistant that learns directly on your lock screen. And we call it Voitto. It's victory in English. And Voitto, we were experimenting what can personalization mean, and mean in a context that the person doesn't actually open the news application at all, but everything happens directly on their lock screen. And this is not just a technological feat, but it's also about user experience, the tone of voice. How can you deliver important content based on different parameters, your personal interest, the social relevance, the breaking news value, directly on the lock screen of people. And we had a multidisciplinary team doing this. We had journalists, data scientists, and service designers and ethnographers to try to figure out how this might work. And yeah, we built the whole pipeline. Like they tried out different kind of machine learning algorithms to actually make better recommendations. And at the same time, we experimenting with the user experience. What would it look like if you had a news assistant living on your lock screen? You know, how could you give it feedback, for example? Would there be like more this or less this kind of a thing there, or maybe being more discreet in the tone of voice? But first of all, one thing, we need to show that this is a machine actually recommending to you something. So that needs to be very visible to the user. Another thing was that, okay, on the lock screen, you cannot have that many interactions. So how can we actually learn from people? So we tried out different things. For example, that the user can give direct feedback to this assistant that learns in a form of a news alert on your lock screen. So direct feedback, more of this, less of this. Then also indirect feedback, like if you are not opening that or expanding that particular news alert, the system learned that, okay, maybe that wasn't that interesting to this particular user. So yeah, we experimented, we tried out different kinds of interactions and parameters in the algorithm itself, in the recommender engine itself. And in here, again, it's very important to understand that this is not just a technological thing, but it's the content. What kind of content do you want to serve? It's about the intelligence. What kind of recommendation algorithms are you going to need? And then it's the user interface. So you need to have them all figured out in order to understand and what kind of an effect and impact you can actually have in a person's life. So yeah, today we try to validate every experiment like this with data, both quantitative and qualitative. We had with Voitto a smart news alert that learns directly from your lock screen. We have very good results. Like, the team is happy because 90% of those people, and again, opt in to this smart personalized news assistant. They opt in. 90% of those people who opt in also keep Voitto on. So that's quite amazing, 90% of those. And today, Voitto's recommended news alerts are the most opened news alerts. And the big dream for us was that how can you create a news experience, a personalized news experience directly on your lock screen, and personalize the experience without the user actually opening the app at all. And in here, what I want to say in here, again, this was something we wanted to learn how this new kind of an user experience would work. How could you combine content, AI, and user interfaces in order to actually create a journalistic experience happening directly on your lock screen?
Okay, that's a very interesting case. Thank you, Jarno. Well, I like that you gave us a very concrete example already. I'll take it a bit further. I have another use case that I would like to discuss. I was thinking of taking a look at the current COVID-19 crisis because we noticed that nowadays almost all of the news is about COVID-19. So what can we actually do as a media company, or how can personalization help us as a media company to help the user find what else he or she needs to know, so outside of the COVID-19 news? Gordon, is that something you want to discuss?
Yeah, I think so the COVID-19 stuff is an interesting example of kind of the difference between kind of the environment that you create through kind of driving that editorial mandate and editorial agenda, and the kind of other opportunities that personalization can allow in terms of letting users discover content that they might really have a strong affinity for. When it comes to COVID coverage itself, it's really, for us, it's not a case where we see personalization being terribly appropriate. On any given day, there is an agenda that we're trying to set. There is a narrative and a flow to the coverage that we're trying to really manage through the decision-making that makes us who we are. So the structure of the stories, the range of topics that we cover, the way those stories are packaged up, we don't really see that as something where personalization is going to be a strong supporter. We are who we are, we're doing what we do, and we want Canadians to see that. And we think that that's an important part of maintaining our identity as a news organization. When you get to the things that are not COVID, though, now you're really talking about a very, very, very different world, where when people tire of COVID coverage, and make no mistake, like, the COVID coverage is what is drawing people in, it's what they're paying attention to first. And for a subset of those users, they'll go looking for other things. What people go looking for in terms of those other things isn't nearly as consistent as it would be with any other kind of dominant coverage agenda. Some people really want to move from the serious COVID stuff to much lighter stuff, horoscopes, entertainment articles. They want to break from whatever it was that just was depressing as hell. There's another subset of users who really prefer to be directed into political coverage that's non-COVID, or business coverage that's non-COVID, or economic coverage that's non-COVID, that speaks to different issues that aren't really related to, or might just be tangentially related to, the overriding kind of issues that are being created or caused by COVID. Some people may still need to go look for a house, or wondering what's happening in the real estate, and so they're skewing to just pure real estate content. That mix of tastes and interests and personal appetites doesn't necessarily lend itself to the same kind of curation as we would rely on, or most newspapers would rely on, in terms of strict section hierarchies. You can simply give people better options earlier through personalization that branches out from that dominant focal area for coverage. So for me, that's the most interesting way to use personalization right now. For personalized COVID content, we just think that kind of anything related to you know, we don't really, when it comes to health information, we basically pull that stuff out of our recommenders. We don't actually want to recommend health information. It's not a place where we think it's necessarily appropriate. And so we exclude health-related recommendations from our recommendation systems pretty globally. It's just not a thing that we do. Because of that, it would always fall back into the other set of areas anyways. But what we're seeing is there's traction there as a result of that. So I don't know if it's a happy byproduct or a happy accident, but the performance of the personalization when it comes to the performance against non-COVID content in a world where we are COVID dominant has been markedly better than we would typically tend to see. And I think that it's like a useful example for the rest of the world, because I don't think it's something specific to us. I think it's that there are some subset of groups of people that are just looking for different things. And if you can get that to them, that's good for them, because everyone kind of, you know, when you're tired of COVID, you're tired of COVID, and you really probably do need to change your base.
Yeah, true. Okay, well, thank you, Gordon. Very interesting. So I'm going to wrap up here for this section. So to summarize, I want to state that it's clear from the panel discussion that you decide for personalization because you're hoping for better audience engagement and experience. But on the other hand, we're also aware that there is not one perfect solution that works for each media company and each consumer, as Gordon just stated. So that's why I want to dive into the challenges that we as the CPN consortium and also you as the panelists encountered. So I hereby give the floor to Christos. Thank you.
Webinar. Okay, I think now you can hear me. So I will start again, and I will try to keep it short. Thank you everybody for attending. My name is Christos Danezis. I'm the general manager of Sigma Live, the market leader of digital publishing in Cyprus, and part of DS Media Group, the largest media group on the island. With our partners in CPN, we did a long trip the last 3 years as we were designing the user requirements and then evaluating a tool that provides a personalization experience in news content. During the interviews, during the focus groups we did with users, we realized that, yes, there is a need for personalized content, as users do not have enough time to follow the current news or search a publisher for interesting articles. However, we recognized as well some major concerns of the users, such as the transparency, the fear of missing out, their privacy, which is also closely connected with the collection and usage of their data to get a personalized content. Also, we had some concerns about the user behavior, as users have to sign in order to get a personalized experience on multiple platforms or on multiple devices. And during the evaluation process, after pilot testing, we realized that user behavior tends to follow the regular navigation techniques, such as the use of categories, the need of current and latest articles, and not just the personalized, in order to avoid the fear of missing out. So I would like to go to our first speaker. My first question is for Jarno. Personalization means suggesting the right content to the right user at the right time and on the right device. How can you tailor these recommendations depending on the device, location, time, day?
Okay, this is a great question. So first of all, I think like how can we tailor? Well, in the end of the day, everything starts with the usual. Like I said in the beginning, we wanna do things in a very human-centered way. So a person decides the level of personalization. And for example, for us in our news application, you have one totally personalized view, and it's called For You. There we use, like I said in the beginning, there are these 4 focus areas for us in using AI in personalization. So one thing is metadata about the content, and then there is the user preferences that the user has in our application, and then it's matching those things. That's what happens, and we have an example of different algorithms working in our services in order to give you the for you, or creating the for you experience, for example, in our news application. So say that you are interested in sushi, you read a lot of articles about sushi, or if you are interested in mountaineering, you can either directly tell to the application that that's where your head's at, that's what you want more, or then we use these ambient signals, your reading history, to actually tailor the feed for you. Then we also have, and this is actually an interesting case, we also use location, and again, the user can decide, either manually put the location or then give the access to the location of the device. So we can create a location-based view to the user. And this is interesting because what we found when we were developing this is actually that the location wouldn't work that well into this other view. And again, maybe this is related to this particular use case and the role of news. So we use in our news application and in our website, there's a particular view that you have location-based recommendations coming to you as a user. So, and then like I mentioned, previously, when I talked about Voitto and our lock screen recommendations, that's another kind of use case and user experience what we are kind of allowing user to choose. So there isn't a very short answer to your question, like saying that how we do this, but in the end of the day, it's these 4 focus areas: the content understanding, the content distribution, and then of course understanding the performance and analytics, through analytics, that everything works in the pipeline. So, and like I said, then we truly want to understand if this personalized experience works for different kind of users through qualitative and quantitative data. And maybe one thing what I want to say in here as well, from the very beginning, we thought that our journalistic values need to be encoded to the algorithms, to the data. So basically, our newsroom can directly affect through a graphical user interface how important something is from the journalistic point of view, and that's a very important thing. So the journalist and newsroom need to be able to kind of override this more personalized kind of recommendations if there is something very important happening. So that's something that we built in. And maybe important to kind of mention in here what has been previously said about creating the narrative. Okay, we trust that we trust our users to kind of that they are interested in our service, in our content, when they actually use our news application or our website, and then they can choose the level of personalization in there. And maybe one thing to mention in here as well is related to this, like ethics and transparency. So every time that we release something, a new feature that uses personal data to personalize something, we tell what good does it make for the user. So we want to apply this very human-centered approach also in our communications. This is why we use the data. This is what it does for you. This is what it does for your kind of news experience. And I think that's the only way to kind of keep the citizen in the loop. And also then the users and the citizens can give more enlightened feedback about the things that we actually do. So it's our mission when we apply these new technologies to personalize the experience, to educate through building, and then take that feedback on what actually works from our users.
You actually answered also my second question, which is as I'm a member of the Media Ethics Commission here in Cyprus, and you are coming from Finland, which is a country well known for the ethical challenges. And as we are going to an environment, a digital environment with robot journalism, and it's pretty obvious that you are very aware of the ethical challenges on algorithm journalism, right?
Yes. So this is a discussion we have regularly in our newsroom with people that are actually doing the news, and we don't separate. Like I said in the beginning, that we need to start to think a media organization, as a news organization, as a multidisciplinary entity that brings together journalists and data scientists and ethnographers and service designers in order to understand how this all works. And like I said earlier, that this is when you use these new technologies, when you put anything in front of a person in today's world, you need to understand more precisely the impact, the effect. And this is also a discussion that we have. And this affects, like I think it was Gordon who mentioned previously, that there are some topics that can be kind of excluded to be recommended for people. So this is the same for us. For example, if there is something that is truly that we think that is not kind of suitable for personalized recommendations. Say that there's something really horrible happened to a family or something like that. Like, and I don't want to even go there to these examples that everyone face through the news, but something very horrible. So you don't actually want a person to encounter that as a personalized for you experience. If there is like someone's died or a family has died or something like that. So it's very important to be on the pulse on how you actually create this experience. So what are your values, your journalistic values, your values as a newsroom? Because I think in the end of the day, your values show in the final product, the final experience. And in today's world, every experience is interactive. So we need to be also we need to understand the effect of this experience that we are creating.
Thank you very much, Jarno. As we are talking about ethics, I think that a part of it has to do also with the privacy and how we handle data. So I would like to ask Ine, which seems from what I heard before that, Ine, you are a very sensitive person on sharing your data with algorithms in general. However, you understand that in order to have a complete picture of the user's preferences, it is essential to track users' activity, maybe on multiple sources or multiple devices. How can we collect and maybe aggregate data from multiple sources while protecting at the same time users' privacy? Is there a solution? Do you see a solution on that?
I think I've seen over the past year or so several solutions that do that. Yes, that keep let's say that make data impersonal to an extent that it's not possible to identify an individual within the data set anymore. And I think that's also the criteria that the criterion that the GDPR uses. As long as you cannot lead information back to an individual, then it doesn't count as personal data. And there are definitely ways to do that. For one thing, there is a concept called K-anonymity that has been around for quite a while, that boils down to the idea that you never make groups that are smaller than a certain number of people. Let's say you never make groups of people that are smaller than 20 people. And so it makes it difficult to trace back which individual had certain preferences. So you never select for a combination of preferences that really makes it possible to individualize a person. So there are definitely possibilities there.
What do you think is the reason a user is reluctant to give consent? Is it the trust on a specific brand? Is it the transparency on how the data will be used? And we're not talking about personal data, we're talking about data of news content and how the usage of the news content. So
yeah, well, the question is always, is it worth it for them? What's in it for them, right? And so you wonder, like, depending on what am I giving here, what am I getting back? Is it worth it for me? If I may push back a little, since we're talking about challenges, I personally actually like to rely on the expertise of in curation of quality news providers. I'm not an expert myself in curation, so I like it that an expert makes a selection for me of the kind of news that I should rely on. And in that sense, if personalization becomes too personal, I also fear that whichever news provider I visit, I will get the exact same experience, which is not what I'm looking for, because I do curate. So I choose, for example, the New York Times for my American news and my world news, but I choose a local news provider for local news because they have different expertises there. And I wouldn't, at some point I did actually get a question from the New York Times whether they could give me more news about Brussels, whether I wanted that from them. And I don't think they're experts when it comes to really what happens in my area. Even though I think they're excellent reporters. I mean, that's not the point. So I do curate a little bit, but I do hope that within their expertise, they use their expertise and they do not rely on my preferences alone.
Thank you, Ine, for your inputs. I would like now to go to Swantje. As far as I know, subscription services is raising in digital media as a business model. How do you think that the user area should be optimized in a way that it will provide unique advantages for registered users, for subscribers? And do you think that content personalization can be considered a competitive advantage for a digital publisher to have it available in a subscription environment?
First of all, to maybe understand our environment of Spiegel.de or the Spiegel app, we have like the public area, like the news feed, which is totally like unpersonalized, without any recommendations, totally curated by our newsroom. And then we have, if you're registered, we have the For Me area. Like it's not really an innovation. It's like, I think the New York Times does it, the NZZ does it in Switzerland. And so we differentiate between the news feed, so the stuff which is really going on and our experts think which is important for everybody, and then we have the area for yourself, covering your personal interests, going deeper into like segments you really like or something like that. And of course, in addition to that, we have the subscription area. So if you're a subscriber, you have access to all the content which is behind the paywall. So basically, these are the three areas you have on the web page and in the app. And we try to really focus on optimizing the For Me area as like a personal hub of information. So we have so many different formats we provide over different channels, and we try to like create this personal hub in a way that you can access your newsletter you subscribe to, for example, and you can access the podcast you like to listen to, or for example, a segment you really like or an author you want to follow. So this is the area you can really curate for yourself, while there is the main area which is curated by our experts. So, and I actually myself, I really like this this balance of you can choose yourself in which context you want to dive into and how you feel like consuming information and news yourself. I think it's different states of mind you're in when you're doing that.
Yeah, so in fact, you have separated the personalized content in a different environment than the regular content which comes from the newsroom, right?
Yes, and it's right now I think it's more like customization, or it's supposed to become more like customization at the first step. So you have like building blocks everybody could access, and you just put them together the way you need it for your daily life. So that's the first step for us, and then we just want to try to go deeper and closer to personalization to understand if it's useful for our users or if not, and if they want it.
Thank you very much, Swantje. I would like to go to Gordon now. Gordon, you are the most experienced from everybody here in news personalization, as you do it for more than 7 years in the Globe and Mail. I would like to ask you something, as you have this experience to tell us. Do you think that on a news personalization world, just one publisher is already a filter bubble?
Well, it depends. If you have an editorial mandate that adheres that you hew to the party line, then yes. I would say Breitbart in the US proved that there's a pretty clear filter bubble there. Fox News in the US, there's a pretty clear filter bubble there, and that has nothing to do with personalization. That has to do with the directive from the owner. So sure, you can use any media entity to create a filter bubble and try and draw an audience to you based on an identity as something that is, by a group of people for a group of people. There's any number of hate websites that would prove the same thing. I would say in terms of for, say, general interest news publishers, let's use a generic national title in any country that, is either slightly left, slightly right, but doesn't particularly have a strong identity and tries to do quote unquote objective journalism, say. Is there a real danger that wide-scale deployments of personalization in a context like that could lead to a filter bubble? My answer is unequivocally no, if the personalization system is designed well. The reason for that is that personalization systems don't always have to cater to things that are closest to the core of the things that you have read. So we have a large number of different recommendation modules. Some of those recommendation modules are actually explorers. Those explorers are designed to avoid filter bubbles. They are recommendation engines designed to identify content you've never read that you might like. Those types of systems can be designed to ensure that filter bubbles don't crop up, that additional viewpoints, that additional perspectives are being brought forward through those personalization or recommendation technologies. There are a lot of different ways that you can go about doing that in order to ensure that, sort of like from an engineering perspective, you've safeguarded against the creation of a filter bubble. For example, here's a dangerous example that works, but also it'll show you why from an engineering perspective you can get away from it. One of the most effective ways in the world you can improve the performance of your recommendation systems is to build two recommendation systems. Build a recommendation system that recommends articles people will love. Build another recommendation system that tries to figure out which articles will you hate. Make sure that you compare the two lists to each other and filter, cross-filter them. The reason why is sometimes you get articles that will score very high for I will love you through a technique, and you'll get, so if you compare sort of like a collaborative filtering, sort of item or person, if you create a list of recommendations based on item, so people who read this read this, and then you do the same thing with people, you might find that those lists are different. And dumping out all of the articles that you think people won't like from the list of people you think will like will give you a lot of lift. But if you flip that around, you could go the other way too and try and find all of those articles and push more of them and see if some of the recommendations weren't actually wrong. There's like it's a really interesting part of the recommendation evaluation stack to look at. Why is a recommender right? Why is a recommender wrong? How consistent are the recommenders, and are there opportunities for tuning as you compare the performance of different recommenders? There's a whole lot of stuff in it around that space that just from an engineering perspective lets you safeguard against a filter bubble. And so I would say the only way you have recommendation systems that lead to filter bubbles is if you have irresponsible engineers who design it to create it. That's...
Yeah. One of our learnings during the pilots was the fact that users were asking for categories to navigate. In a perfect personalized environment, the algorithm will deliver relevant content to the users without the need to choose categories. So you've been there and you know what happened. So I would like to ask you, do you think that users need a transition period from the way they consume content now to a personalized experience?
I mean, we're not believers in fully personalized experiences. So that's probably the first thing to say about that, right? So we believe that personalization can augment the experience of the Globe and Mail, where the experience of the Globe and Mail is still a shared experience. So for us, we really see personalization as a smaller part of the product offering that is more likely to deliver marginal value than to be the primary driver of value for a user. When we deploy recommenders, we typically deploy them into contexts that allow that kind of filtering through kind of narrowly scoping the recommendation. So the easiest way to explain that is sort of like, if you're on a politics section or a politics story, if there's a personalized component on that page, it's likely to be narrowly scoped to politics or subcategories of politics. If you're on sports, it's going to be narrowly scoped to subcategories of sports or subcategories of basketball or whatever sport you're interested in. It's really only if you're in a very general context like a homepage or if we have a personalized recommendation in a newsletter that's going out more broadly, where the body of the newsletter is something that's shared, there might be 1 or 2 entries that are personalized. That's more what we see the world like. I think that if you're going to create a fully personalized news experience and have personalization be the dominant mode of engagement, you need to provide people with an ability to manipulate that environment, in part because you need to learn from them. And I think that that's part of creating a healthy environment, is like, show me more of this, show me less of this, let me see this category. I think that those UIs are the type of UI that you need to create if you're going to create a personalized experience that can withstand the test of time. I think that there are some challenges there, the kind of explorers that I described earlier in a fully personalized experience. It's a lot harder to figure out how you would get people to tell me, show me more of the things I'm not interested in, and do that in a compelling way that would avoid the filter bubble. So I find the idea of filter bubbles in that sort of highly personalized experience more risky. But again, I think you can engineer your way out of it if you spend the time to think about what it is that you're trying to do and make in kind of those ethical safeguards.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gordon. I would like now to talk with Mattia. Mattia is representing one of the SMEs that we collaborated with into the CPN project. And as people are really concerned about privacy, we heard it before, and they are very concerned about being tracked. So we need a solution there. So during our pilot study, we realized also that users prefer a one fast click login instead of a sign up process. And that was something that we realized with ID word system that we used in our websites. However, this is kind of difficult to proceed like this, as we are heading to the end of the third-party cookies. And I think that Matthias can tell us more about it and how we deployed our system and what are the solutions that you can provide with ID word.
Thanks, Christos. I hope you can hear me and see my screen as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was very interesting to hear the panelists discuss all the aspects related to personalization, and takeaway essentially is that there are different degrees to which a publisher might decide to personalize their content. It might go from simple optimization of certain user flows to a fully personal experience. And to an extent, where we're sitting is the layer, the information layer that's behind those editorial choices of how to use personalization. So we are a UK AI and data compliance company, and we essentially deal with the side of the equation has to do with data. How do you collect data about the user while respecting privacy? as you were saying, Christos. So the data angle is important because whether you're trying to optimize your content inventory or your ad inventory, you will need to have knowledge about your audience, and particularly about the individual preferences. And the privacy is important, not only because we are afraid of the GDPR stick, but also because, as you said, there's third-party cookies are coming to an end, and being a technology that's being used to identify users and to track their preferences across multiple domains, and that's going to throw up a number of questions for personalization, as I said, for content or for advertising. So we obviously focus on the content aspect as part of a CPN, and we try to do so by essentially breaking down the issue into three components. The first one is, how do you identify users? So the issue of identification, I mean, the only legally compliant and effective way of identifying a user is asking them to identify themselves, so through logins. However, all publishers will know that users, in fact, all websites will know users don't really want to log in. It's they're lazy, they don't like clicking around. So to deal with that, we developed a two-step process working with DS, and we implemented the first one. So here are three screenshots or parts of screenshots from the Sigma Live website. You can go there and just kind of check the product itself. You see in the first one, there's a little plugin button sitting on the bottom left corner of the website. It pops out the first time you arrive, you land on the website, or you can click on it, and then it asks you to log in. And then it's just a one-click login, and you're authenticated. So this uses first-party cookies, but it uses sort of a super cookie. It's important because it avoids the barriers posed by cookie blockers and ad blockers. And the interesting lesson that we learned in this trial was that when we were using a standard login, conversion rates were 30 times lower than when we switched to a one-click login. And it worked really well. So we now have over 120,000 users and counting, increasing, 1 or 2,000 a day. And it's been a very, very useful experience. However, it's still below 20% of users. It will go up, but it's still not quite kind of the killer blow that we were looking at. So the next step is to actually embed the login system into the consent flow. And so this will put the user before a choice of either managing cookies, which is at the very least 3 clicks, or creating this identity, which is 1 click. And you can see on a test website, we are working on that. What is important to say about this is, I have a legal background. We are a compliance startup. There's a lot going on around consent management platforms that's not quite right. I'd like to flag 2 things. You might be familiar with the Transparency Consent Framework from IAB, which is all about capturing the consent of people being tracked and passing along the supply chain for advertising. I also want to flag that 2 days ago, the European Data Protection Board published guidelines on consent, which pretty much gave a very damning verdict on the way many cookie banners operate. So it's very important that when we're looking at acquiring consent from the user to being tracked and creating that standard user identity, we do it so in a compliant way. The second question that we tried to address was, how do you track data across domains and across devices? Now, this is obviously a complex issue. If the bottom line is that if media companies were to base their recommendations only on the data user generates on their site, they would have an incomplete picture of a user preferences, and they would run the risk of creating a filter bubble because all they see is the sort of content the user engages with, and so the recommender would automatically suggest stories that people have already read, and it's difficult for those recommenders to bring that diversity that Gordon was talking about. It's possible from an engineering perspective, but it's difficult when you only have access to a silos of data. So tracking data across domains and across devices is important. So what we did there is we created an infrastructure whereby the data is pulled across all the domains they use the login system, the ID word login system. And so in that way, the same user can be tracked on different websites. So each publisher will have the benefit of knowing the click stream of a user across different domains and potentially across different devices. But the companies are not sharing data with each other, which will create obviously a lot of commercial and legal questions. What's happening here is that the data is shared into a user data account. So the data is actually owned and controlled by the user, which is absolutely what the regulation would expect. And it's only accessible by the user in the first place. What publishers have access to is anonymized data about the segment the user belongs to or other things. So no liability for personal information, but certainly the benefit of knowing the preferences. So how do we protect privacy? So that's the third question, and in part I've already answered that by saying that the data controls the user controls their own personal data. But we're doing more, because the moment the user decides to benefit from personalization, then the data would have, in theory, to be given, so companies would have to be given access to such data and process it on the cloud to power the AI recommender. So what we are working on now is actually a system to personalize content on the device, meaning the data is still under the control of the user, but is never shared with the cloud. The technology is quite cutting edge. It's called federated learning, but there are already some examples of that working. And this will change completely liability. It will change completely the position of publishers, but also of advertisers when it comes to benefiting from personalization without having downsides of relying on third-party cookies or fingerprinting or other pretty dodgy technique to track user behavior, because personal data never leaves the user. So we are now working with WPP, sorry, I went too far, and some other advertisers to look at that, but the same principle applies to an ad inventory or a content inventory. It can be done by just working with within an understanding that the data belongs to the user. So just to sum up, the benefits are for publishers that they control the data, anonymized data, not personal data, but it remains within that domain. They can protect ad revenues, but also engage audiences through increased personalization. And they are sure about GDPR compliance, reducing data management costs and privacy compliance risks. And
Thank you very much, Mattia. As we're coming to the end, I would like to give the floor now to Tilman for a final discussion. Tilman. Hi.
Yes, thank you, Christos. Thank you, Mattia. Since we're already quite a few minutes over time, I'll just be very brief. My name is Tilman. I'm a member of the innovation team at Deutsche Welle, the German foreign broadcaster. And we had planned some more time for questions. I'm just going to take one now that I have here in front of me from Dorian to the whole panel. I'm just going to read it out to you guys. It's about active and passive personalization. So the question is, when understanding human-machine interaction, people tend to divide up in different groups. On the one side, you have people who want to keep agency, so they want to make their own decisions, more customizations, so they give you the info needed to personalize their experience. On the other hand, Dorian writes, there are people who don't need to keep agency. The machine personalizes the content based on personalized data without an active act of people giving personal info directly. Question is, do you also take these different groups into account in creating a personalized experience? Who feels most confident of answering that among the panelists? Gordon, do you maybe have an answer for Dorian?
I do, and we do a mix of both, but I'll say kind of like, again, just getting back to the point I was making earlier about kind of when we think about personalization and automated curation, The difference for us is that automated curation piece we typically think of as global optimization. In some cases, we might do a subset where we optimize for a specific subset for, say, a certain geography, but we're talking about large groups of people. And what we're really relying on for most of that decisioning is the implied consent that we have gotten, or the explicit consent that we've gotten through the cookie policy and the privacy policy that we have in place and the terms of use for the site. And then the kind of one-to-one, the use of data, all of those things are part of that framework. There are appropriate opt-outs, those options. But we look much more at that kind of global optimization piece as the more important piece for driving the performance of the business broadly, which is really the focal point for us. Like, we're trying to remain a sustainable and relevant news organization. We find the easiest path to being a sustainable and relevant news organization is to focus on global optimization cases, because the lift is just greater because we have more control over more of the page. Whereas with personalization, we're always looking at a very small subset of the page. A very small subset of the pixels on the screen are only ever allocated to personalization. It doesn't make as big of an impact. So that's what we tend to think about, but it's actually driven primarily, it's driven by two things. One, it's driven by the fact that we can make a difference, and it's just more in line with our brand. We're not a brand that's really about personalization. We believe that personalization is a great tool to have. We're going to continue to invest in it, and we've invested a ton in it. But that's not the focal point for us. Is how does that layer in as a secondary or tertiary strategy to strategies that are really designed to protect and preserve the brand, and then to figure out how to take advantage of the efforts our newsroom make with maximum effect. And we find that automation augments our ability to do that well.
Okay, I think that's a great comment. Sorry?
Yeah. Can I comment this question very briefly? Because
of course, I'm not going to cut you off.
Yeah, great question. And again, I wouldn't say this is not a technological issue that we talk about here. Algorithms, they are the kind of the things we have running in the background, but in the end of the day, it becomes how transparent, how visible you make the thing for the user, the citizen, that the experience is personalized, and what are your ways as a user, as a citizen, to actually affect that particular experience. And that is related to agency. Agency happens in the intersection between the algorithms and the user, and that's the user interface. And again, this is very often the conversation goes to the technology, the algorithms, the example. Those are just things in the background for the user. So the focus should be in understanding, again, the whole pipeline, the content, the intelligent algorithms, different kinds of algorithms, examples of algorithms, and then the user interface. How does personalization manifest itself in the actual user experience? And that's the key thing when it comes to the agency and how people feel that they can actually control the experience itself. Be it like a very simple thing, what we use, that, okay, there is a section for you when you want to have the personalized view, and then the main headlines, and then there is the location-based news for you to explore. So make things visible to your user. That's the way to ensure the openness and that the agency stays in a human-centered way in the hands of the citizen.
Thank you, Jarno. I'd like to take this and what Gordon said as a nice closing line. So make things visible to your audience, and personalization is a great thing, which is sort of what has driven us in the CPN project as well. So let me thank all of you. Let me thank Swantje, Ine, Jarno, and Gordon, of course, for being here, for presenting. Let me also thank Al and Mattia for both of your presentations. And thanks everyone who joined. It's great to have you. Thank you for your interest. And of course, we'll send out the recording of this session to all of you who registered. You will also get some more information. If you still have questions, feel free to reach out to us. You have the email, and we'll also send out links if you are interested in a more detailed demo of both of the startup presentations, or if you're interested in having a closer look at what we did at CPN. The prototype is available. Let us know. You can get in contact with us. And with that, stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks for being here.